Welcome to the ArtsCenter in Carrboro, North Carolina, and the premiere of Haunted, an American Tale, written and performed by the phenomenal Dr. Sonny Kelly. Haunted, an American Tale is a newly commissioned theatrical work that recounts the roots of hatred and fear embedded in the story of the 1898 lynching of Manley McCauley in Orange County. It also tracks the roots of racialized violence in America as manifested in the colonial justice or injustice system, the Wilmington Massacre of 1898, and the recent murders of Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arberry, and George Floyd. This afternoon, Sonny Kelly will bring to life the voices of historians, ancestors, elders, youth, politicians, pundits, and poets as he traces the roots, R-O-O-T-S, and roots, R-O-U-T-E-S, of modern-day anti-Black violence in America. I am Renee Price, Chair of the Orange County Board of Commissioners, and on behalf of the production crew and sponsors, thank you for being here. Our sponsors for this production include the Orange County Arts Commission, the ArtsCenter, Free Spirit Freedom, the North Carolina Arts Council, and the Orange County Community Remembrance Coalition. Haunted, in fact, is part of a series of events by the coalition whose work is inspired by the Equal Justice Initiative, or EJI, of Montgomery, Alabama. EJI has embarked on a multi-year project to recognize the victims and survivors of racial terror lynching from 1877 to 1950. To date, they have documented over 4,400 incidences of racial terror lynching in the United States during that period, and of that number, over 119 occurred in North Carolina. Our coalition seeks to recognize local victims of racial terror lynching, and in so doing is working to disrupt and overcome the detrimental systems and mindsets that have plagued America for generations. Regarding the star of our show, Sonny Kelly, he is a performer, storyteller, playwright, motivator, and comedian. He has acted professionally on stage, in television for over 20 years, and in 2020 earned a PhD in Communication and Performance Studies from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. With Haunted, Kelly will uncover or unbury the true story, the oft-times brutally honest history of the United States of America. For with these truths, we will persist in our fight for humanity, freedom, and justice. As we prepare to watch this unique performance, we need to thank several people. Michael Betts II, our sound designer, Thomas Mauney, associate lighting designer, Jarek Mack, technical director, Rami Mack, video technician, and Elena Kelly and Brenton Harrison performing vocals. We also are grateful to Liz Grimes for the lighting design of the original performance. Due to technical issues, we had to re-record the performance without her brilliant design. So what you are about to see is a recording that lacks her work from the original performance. In addition, many thanks to Sterling Kelly for designing the Haunted poster and for making final video edits. And now, I am pleased to present to you, on stage, Dr. Sonny Kelly in Haunted, an American Tale.
Southern trees bear a strange fruit, blood on the leaves and blood at the root. Black bodies swinging in the southern breeze. Oh, that strange fruit hanging from the poplar trees. Pastoral scene of the gallant South, the bulging eyes and twisted Then the sudden smell of burning flesh. Here is a fruit for the crows to pluck, for the rain to gather, for the wind to suck, for the sun to rise, for the tree to dry out. Here is a strange and bitter crowd. As I went down in the river to pray, studying about that good old way when you shall wear the starry crown, good Lord, show me the way. Oh, brother, let's go down, let's go down, let's go down. Oh, sister, let's go down, down in the river to pray. As I went down in the valley to pray, studying about that good old way when you shall wear starry crown, good Lord, show me the way. Oh, mourner, let's go down, let's go down, let's go down. Oh, mourner, let's go down, down in the valley to pray. As I went down in the valley to pray, studying about that good old way when you shall wear the starry crown, good Lord, show me the way. By and by we'll all go down, all go down, all go down. By and by we'll all go down, down in the valley to pray.
6 humans trapped by happenstance in bleak and bitter cold. Each possessed a stick of wood, or so the stories told. The dying fire in need of logs, the first one held his back, for of the faces round the fire, he noticed one was black. The next man, looking across the way, saw one not from his church and couldn't bring himself to give the fire his stick of birch. The poor man sat in tattered clothes and gave his coat a hitch. Why should his log be put to use to warm the idle rich? The rich man sat back and thought of all the wealth he had in store, and how to keep what he had earned from the lazy, shiftless poor. The black man's face bespoke revenge as the fire passed from his sight. See, all he saw in his stick of wood was a chance to spite the white. The next man of this forlorn group gave not except for gain. Giving only to those who gave was how he played the game. Each held his log in death's still hands as proof of human sin. They didn't die from the cold without. They died from the cold within. James Patrick Kinney. About 100 years ago, great American poet Langston Hughes wrote this poem. It's called I Too. I too sing America. I am the darker brother. They make me eat in the kitchen when company comes. But I laugh and eat well and grow strong. Tomorrow, I'll be at the table when company comes, and nobody will dare say to me, eat in the kitchen then. Besides, they'll see how beautiful I am and be ashamed. Oh no. Oh no. Oh no. Why did he do that, Daddy? I don't know, son. I think he must have been really sad or angry. But why, Daddy? Why was he so sad or angry? I don't know. Maybe he had mental illness, like he was sick, like his brain was sick. And, everybody in that church was different than him. They weren't different than him. He's people and they're people. No, son, it's a black church. He's a white guy, and that's a black church that he... It's Wednesday, June 17th, 2015, at Emanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church, known as Mother Emanuel, in Charleston, South Carolina. And it is a typical Wednesday night. Now, Mother Emanuel has been a bastion for the black community for centuries. For centuries, it's been a place where abolitionists and captives, civil rights leaders and volunteers have gathered together to plan revolts, runaways, rallies, and revivals. In fact, in 1822, Mother Emanuel was burned to the ground by a bunch of angry white people who found out that an actual slave revolt was being planned from its very pews. But on this night, it's a typical Wednesday night, Bible study. Pastor Clementa C. Pinckney is leading Bible study for 11 members and one unexpected guest. The 11 members are all black, and the guest is a 21-year-old white supremacist named Dylan Storm Roof. Now, the name Dylan is Welsh. It means son of the sea, or son of the wave. On this Wednesday night, as the 11 members of Mother Emanuel bow their heads in solemn prayer, this angry son of the South raises his. He rises up like a wave in this seaside church house with a .45 caliber pistol in hands. And he rains down a storm of bullets upon the people there. Sharonda Coleman Singleton, Cynthia Graham Hurd, Susie J. Jackson, Ethel Lee Lance, DePayne Middleton Doctor, Clementa Carlos Pinckney, Daniel Lee Simmons, Myra Thompson, my two little boys, Sterling and Langston, were 7 and 4 when this happened. But Daddy, he didn't need to be afraid of them. They were just praying. Why was he afraid of them? I don't know, son. Sometimes people just hate people. And that's why we have to always be careful, okay? But why? Why what? Why do people just hate people? And why do we have to be careful? I don't know, son. Because they do. Okay? And because I said so, okay? Because I said so. Okay. I knew why. I knew exactly why. It was because of blackness. There. Okay, I said it. It was because of blackness, or whatever we've made blackness to be. Blackness is a thing of no real substance, yet it weighs upon my existence in the most precarious of ways. It is laden with stigma. Some say it's just a figment of imagination these days. Some days I'd like to believe them, erase it all, and relieve them of the guilt and the shame and the sorrow and the pain, but blackness is not going anywhere. My blackness is always right there, with me, without me, around me, about me. It rests upon my shoulders, pressed down from the ancestors, a mantle so dark, yet lighter than air. At times I lose sight of it and forget that it's there. But I can always feel it. It reframes my anger into bestial rage. It reclaims my protests as riots on the newspaper page. It looms in a way that colors my core. It rises like a specter when I enter a store, or when I wear a hoodie on the street, or when I forget my receipt, when I forget to keep a smile on my face, or when I'm in an uncomfortable place, where I'm the only one not seen as a native son, when I forget to pay a debt, or that my body is a threat to some and a target to others. Right before Dylan opened fire on him, 26-year-old Tywanza Sanders asked him, "Why are you doing this?" "I have to do this. You rape our women, and you're taking over our country, and you have to go."
Walk in the light, beautiful light. Come where the dewdrops of mercy shine bright. Shine all around us by day and by night. Jesus, the light of the world.
I don't entirely blame Dylan for what happened. I don't blame his mental illness. I don't blame the dark web or whatever white nationalist group he was involved with. I blame the ghost of blackness that haunted him. It haunts me too. It haunts my walk and my talk. It haunts my conversations with my kids. And if we're honest, it haunts us all in one way or another. It has for quite some time now. Tuesday, November 22nd, 1898. A Negro rapist and a Negro seducer hanged. It is a fact not generally known that there have been 2 lynchings in North Carolina within the past 2 weeks. The victims in both cases were Negroes. The first was Manley McCauley near Chapel Hill on Friday night, October 28, 1898. On Wednesday afternoon, October 26, Mrs. Milton Brewer eloped from the home of her husband, 4 miles west of Chapel Hill, with Manley McCauley, a young Negro, 18 years old. On Friday, a posse of 18 men, headed by the husband of the woman, set out in pursuit. The Negro and the woman were overtaken just beyond Jonesboro. The Negro was taken part of the distance back to Chapel Hill, but disappeared.
Black bodies swinging in the southern breeze. Oh, that strange fruit hanging from the poplar tree.
Back in 1903, W.E.B. Du Bois wrote a book called The Souls of Black Folk. And in it, he talks about the experiences of black Americans. One ever feels his two-ness. An American, a Negro. Two souls, two thoughts, two unreconciled strivings, two warring ideals in one dark body whose dogged strength alone keeps it from being torn asunder. X marks the spot. Good evening, my friends. Tonight, I am burdened with the challenge of sharing with you, dear ones, a terrifically tragic tale. It is a tale of souls haunted by forbidden love, hatred, betrayal, and cold-blooded murder. And I must warn you, it is not some ghoulish ghost story told to strike fear in the hearts of children by firelight. No, 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 no. Ladies and gentlemen, friends and foes, this story is true. The names have not been changed in order to protect the innocent. And this story, my friends, it is not for the faint of heart. It's kind of like a glass of dark liquor. Aged, aromatic, unassuming, but rest assured, it will bite you. It is, in some ways, stranger than fiction, and yet it is strangely all too familiar to those of us here in this space tonight. It is a story that ended right here at this dogwood tree. X marks the spot. Right here in this place is where Manley McCauley, a young American, strapping, healthy, strong, was confronted with the jarring juxtaposition of his manhood and his blackness. And right here is where he was surrounded by a group of his countrymen who were determined to destroy both. To Manley McCauley, here.
Yeah! Yes!
No, I got one better. To dark liquor and white women. Oh, I apologize. I didn't mean no harm. I didn't mean no disrespect. I reckon it. Sometimes you got to laugh to keep from crying, you know. I know I ought to be more careful in mixed company. My mama and my daddy always taught me that. You know, it was good Christian folk. They say, be more careful, Manley. Pride cometh before the fall, Manley. That's funny because I always thought summer cometh before the fall, but what do I know? I ain't like my folks. I was born free. Freedom is all I know. Now, some folks say I done forgot my place. I say I ain't forgot a solitary thing. My bloodline goes back generations in this country. I know my place. And some folks don't like that about me. Now, I know I done made a lot of folks very angry. And I ain't one to make pretexts about my behavior. My mama and my daddy taught me that. Ran away with a married woman. Stole my boss's wife. Ran away with a married white woman. They say I crossed the county line and the color line all in the same day. But it is what a T.I. is. Dark liquor and white women. My daddy once said, them's the two things that'll get a nigger killed every time. Dark liquor and white women. Funny thing is, I don't even drink. But my friends, this story is not just Manley's story. This story began long before that fateful fall evening in October of 1898. This story has roots. And to get to the root of this story, we have to go back to our family tree. That's right, yours and mine. See, our family tree holds our history, and it has been here for longer than any of us can remember, and it will continue to grow and flourish for as long as we can imagine, I suppose. But I must warn you, it is a haunted tree, full of saints and haints, ises and ain'ts, specters and spooks and inconvenient truths, constitutionalists and Confederates, captives and captors, euphemistically euthanized natives and Irish scrappers. They're all right here, coursing through our veins. Can you feel them? It's like that great poet Paul Laurence Dunbar said, "They have shared your nightly vigils, they have shared your daily toil, and their blood with yours commingling has enriched the southern soil." Can you feel them coursing through your veins? I can feel them right now, just running through my natural born vein, just running and running so hard and so fast. Sometimes I feel like my blood could boil. Can you feel them? To help me tell this story tonight, I brought along my ancestors, my white grandpaps who boldly stood up against British tyranny and northern aggression, who publicly poured tea in the sea and privately forced their bodily affection on my black and native grandmams. My black grands who survived the Middle Passage, whose wisdom and dignity defied the countless lashes. My Native American grands who honored the land and the gift of life till uninvited guests changed the plan with theft and strife. My African, European, and indigenous American ancestors who were killing, oppressing, and enslaving one another long before their paths ever collided with each other. I am the embodiment of our forefathers' commitment to these self-evident truths, that all men are created equal. Only they didn't mean all men or any women before the amended sequel. Once alienated from my own unalienable rights, here I stand, a product of my ancestors' struggles and plights. From indentured servitude to expanding frontiers, from chattel slavery to the Trail of Tears, you see, they all live in me. It's like Sister Maya Angelou raved, bringing the gifts that my ancestors gave. I am the dream and the hope of the slave. I am, you are, we are the dream and the hope of our ancestors. Yeah, that's right. Yours and mine. You see, before all of the division and derision, every one of us came from mutual ancestors somewhere far east of here, in or near what we today call Africa. So as strange as it may seem, and as hard as it may be to see, each and every one of us is just an apple fallen from the same family tree, the same haunted tree. It just so happens that some of us, like Manley McCauley and me, happen to be of a slightly darker hue. And in the words of the great William Shakespeare, aye, there's the rub. Tuesday, November 8th, 1898. The Negro is dead. That a white woman would stoop so low as to elope with a Negro seems impossible. But the woman was born of a family who winked at social equality. and thought that the day when the white man and the Negro would be socially equal was not far distant. She married a man who entertained the same views, and they lived happily together until one day when the man came home to find his wife had eloped with his Negro farmhand. They found him, Manley. They found him hanging from a dogwood tree. Historians have placed this particular dogwood tree somewhere in the vicinity of the modern-day intersection of Old Greensboro Road and Hatch Road there in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. X marks the spot. Makes you wonder what his last words were, huh? Now, I wonder what he said. Did he apologize? Mr. Brewer, now, I didn't intend no harm, Mr. Brewer. I apologize now. Maybe he begged, please, Mr. Brewer, please, sir, don't put that thing on my neck, sir. Please, I don't want to die, sir. I don't want to die, please. Maybe he stood strong, faced it, like he knew it was coming. Like that great poet Claude McKay say, if we must die, let it not be like hogs hunted and pinned in an inglorious spot, while round us bark the mad and hungry dogs, making a curse of our cursed lot. If we must die, oh, let us nobly die. Like men, we will first face the murderous, cowardly pack, pressed to the wall, dying but fighting back.
Soon we'll be done with the troubles of this world. The troubles of this world, the troubles of this world. Soon we'll be done with the troubles of this world. I'm going home to live with God.
We can only imagine. What we do know is that Manley McCauley was lynched. What many people don't know is that lynching in America has a very complicated past and intricate roots. See, according to Merriam-Webster, the word lynching simply means to put to death by mob violence without official permission or approval. Many people forget that early America was unbelievably violent by today's standards. And for a while there, lynching had nothing to do with race or blackness. For a while there, it was mostly white folks lynching white folks. In fact, you can trace lynching back to the pre-revolutionary era, where revolution-minded colonists would oppress and persecute Tories or British sympathizers. Matter of fact, the lynch law came from a Revolution-era justice of the peace named Charles Lynch, who would persecute British sympathizers by having them beaten, tarred and feathered, even hung from trees. And don't get me started on the Salem witch trials or the Wild Wild West. For a while there, it seemed like white folks were lynching white folks for general principle. Wasn't until the mid-1860s, when slavery released its boot from the back of black bodies and lynching placed its noose around their necks. See, while law and order flourished in the land, our violent roots thirsted for blood, and blackness rose to the occasion. While white people enjoyed new civil rights like speedy trials, juries of their peers, and innocence until proven guilty, black folks and non-whites were afforded no such luxuries. Soon, the number of white people being lynched decreased, while the number of black people being lynched increased dramatically.
Pastoral scene, of the gallant South, the bulging eyes and twisted mouth.
Lynching became an expected end for any black person who was deemed too uppity in the face of white authority, too persnickety when offered white generosity, or too flirty in the presence of white femininity. In fact, consider the example of Wright Woods, young black man in Little River, North Carolina, back on Sunday, September 12, 1869. It is said that Wright Woods made an untoward remark to a white girl in his community. Before the sun could set, 4 white men on horseback pulled that boy out of a coal kiln where he was working with his father. He went missing for nearly a week before a neighbor noticed a gathering of vultures in a nearby field. They found that boy's body with a note attached to his foot that read, "If the law will not protect virtue, the rope will." Then there was Cyrus Guy. Sunday, December 13th, 1869, in Hillsborough, North Carolina. A Negro named Cyrus Guy was found last week near the Alamance line, hanging to a tree, dead. On his person was a piece of paper that read, "For insulting white ladies." That note on Cyrus Guy's body was written in his own blood. The strange thing is that for many white communities across the country, and especially in the South, lynching a black person became as commonplace and innocent as a community watch patrol or a block party, or both. Claude McKay described it like this: "Day dawned, and soon the mixed crowds came to view the ghastly body swaying in the sun. The women thronged to look, but never a one showed sorrow in her eyes of steely blue. And little lads, lynchers that were to be, danced round the dreadful thing in fiendish glee." Blackness has truly haunted us all in some strange, strange ways over the years.
As I went down in the valley to pray, studying about that good old way when you shall wear starry crown, good Lord, show me the way. Oh, mourner, let's go down, let's go down, let's go down. Oh, mourner, let's go down, down in the valley to pray.
But this confusing concoction of colorized social construction that we today call blackness began long before lynching, or even what we know as America, existed. To get to the root of that, we've got to go way back a few hundred years to the mid-15th century, when European countries led by the Portuguese crown and Prince Henry of Portugal were discovering, exploring, and captivating different parts of Africa. See, these explorers had 3 different goals. Number 1, they wanted to procure riches. Number 2, they were looking for new trade routes. And number 3, they wanted to spread Christianity throughout the world. Now, as they got really good at what they were doing, their affluence and influence grew. And they developed a new goal: to find cheap labor. Many hands make light the work when you're building a global empire. So, Prince Henry of Portugal began this new movement where he would support sailors, navigators, explorers coming from Europe and landing in West Africa to find cheap labor. He was trying to bypass the already successful Islamic slave trade route of his time. And in doing so, he created a new type of slavery, one that the world had never seen before. And it all hinged on this catchy new phrase. It was, o negro. Yeah, his biographer, Gomez Eanas de Surara, wrote it all down in 1453 in a chronicle. negro. Very early in the morning, by reason of the heat, the seamen began to make ready their boats and to take out the captives and carry them to the shore. And these, placed in the field, were a marvelous sight, as black as Ethiops, and so ugly in body and in features. Now, to Surara and to Prince Henry and most other explorers, these black people, their blackness, well, it was deeper than skin tone. It was a condition of the soul. Before, they had lived in perdition of their soul and body, of their soul, and that they were yet pagans and without the clearness and light of the holy faith. Of their bodies, and that they lived like beasts with no understanding of reasonable beings. They did not understand good, but only knew how to live in a bestial sloth. Now, Surara, Prince Henry, and pretty much all European explorers were devout Christians, a religion that is based upon the teachings of a humble, loving, generous Jewish man from Nazareth named Jesus. He taught his followers that they should love their neighbors as themselves. So, how does a religion that teaches love and thoughtfulness and compassion justify the oppression, systematic torture, and enslavement of their neighbors? Well, that's easy. They blame it on God. X marks the spot. I won't be before you long, family. There's a sweet, sweet spirit in the place tonight. Hallelujah, amen. I say hallelujah, amen. I won't be before you long, but I'm going to ask you to open your Bibles, please. Open your Bibles to Genesis chapter 9. We're going to read about a man named Noah. I said Noah was God's man. Noah was God's first round draft pick, his ace in the hole when God saw the evil on the earth and he decided to destroy the earth with the great flood. He chose Noah. Yes, he did. He chose Noah, a faithful man, an obedient man, and had him build an ark, put his family on the ark, and at least 2 of every animal on the ark. When it rained, I said it rained. I said it rained for 40 days and 40 nights. And after it rained for 40 days and 40 nights, the water started to recede. And Noah and his family stepped on out that ark. Landed on solid ground. I said it was time for a new beginning. I said it was time for a new beginning. And Noah became a farmer. He started to grow grapes. And you know, from grapes come that new wine. That's right. Noah started developing wine and making delicious wine for his family and himself. And one day, well, family, you know what happens. Sometimes you have too much. So Noah gets drunk as a skunk, falls out butt ball naked in his tent. Unashamed, uncovered. But who finds Noah but his youngest son, Ham? He walks into his daddy's tent and sees him there with all his bits and pieces hanging out, sees his daddy drunk as a skunk, and what does Ham do? He doesn't know what to do. So he goes to his big brothers, Shem and Japheth, 2 honorable men. He says, my big brothers, Shem, Japheth, daddy is drunk as a skunk and naked in the tent. What do I do? And Shem and Japheth knew, because they was wise and they was righteous, and they came in and they covered Noah's naked body with a cloth and refused to look about it to preserve his honor. And after they left that tent, Noah woke up with one of them, what they call them, hangovers. And he looked up and he saw that what had happened. He saw that his youngest son, Ham, had left him uncovered, unkempt, uncared for. And so he cursed that boy and his son Canaan. A servant of servants he shall be to all of his brethren. So who, might you ask, became the descendants of Ham and his son Canaan, the servant of servants to all of their brethren? Well, in 1578, British voyager and writer George Best presented an answer to the European world that they were so very glad to hear. It is God's will that Ham's son and all his posterity after him should be so black and loathsome as to remain a symbol, a spectacle of disobedience to all the world. So, if black people were the sons of Ham, it was only the Christian thing to do to put them to work. Besides, idle hands are the devil's workshop, you know. Which brings us to that fateful year of 1619, when a private British ship sailed into Port Comfort, dropped anchor in the James River, and entered the Jamestown colony there in Virginia. Now, this was a full year before the Pilgrims landed on Plymouth Rock. We don't know much about this ship, but we're talking now about a manifest. And we've seen that on the manifest there are 20 and some odd Africans on board. Now, besides that manifest, we don't know much more about these 20 and some odd sons and daughters of Ham. But what we do know is that some, if not all of them, were considered indentured servants. Now, all of this takes a turn for the worse. In 1640, when an African indentured servant named John Punch decides to cooperate with two other indentured servants, Victor, a Dutchman, and James Gregory, a man from Scotland, they all decide to break themselves free from their angry and unfair master, Hugh Gwynn, there in Virginia. And these three men come together in a sort of rainbow coalition in their mutual pursuit of freedom. I imagine the conversation went something like this, with John Punch gathering Victor and Mr. Gregory and together and saying, "Brothers, listen, we are men, huh? We are not slaves. We are not animals. That Hugh Gwynn, he is the worst master ever. Oh, let us go. Let us run away together." And then I imagine Victor probably said something like, "Oh, I'm with you, John. It's so hard here. It never gets as cold in Holland. And they work us so hard. Let's go." And then I imagine James Gregory, the Scotchman, he probably jumped in and said, "Fellas, I'm having a hard time understanding what you're saying with your strange accents and such. But if you two fellas mean to run away, then I'm with you. A Scotsman is born with a free spirit that must be unleashed on the world. Let's go!" Or something like that. Anyway, they all get together and run away for freedom. They make it as far as Maryland, when Hugh Gwynn and his slave catchers captures them. He brings them back to Virginia, and they must stand trial before the Virginia Colonial Council. Order! Order! Whereas Hugh Gwynn hath by order of this board brought back from Maryland 3 servants run away from the said Gwynn, this court doth therefore order that each of the 3 receive a punishment of whipping, and to have 30 stripes apiece. One named Victor, a Dutchman, and another, a Scotsman, James Gregory, shall first serve out the time of their indentures with their master, and that the third, being a Negro named John Punch, shall serve his said master for the time of his life, here or elsewhere. Order! Order! This was an historical moment. This is the first time that we see in American history documentation of lifelong slavery, and it is inextricably bound to blackness. Now, soon after this, laws rose up in the colonies that punished any European indentured servant or frontiersman who colluded with or cooperated at all with black African runaways or Native Americans. In fact, they were given rewards like weapons, land, and food if they captured black runaways or killed defiant Native Americans. Then came the one-drop rule. Anyone born anywhere, if they were in America and they had 1 drop of African blood, 1 discernible feature, a kink in their hair, a roundness of their nose, thickness in their lips, they were deemed an African and susceptible to becoming a slave. So now blackness became a marker for lifelong slavery from birth. By the mid-18th century, blackness became a scientific fact when Carl Linnaeus, the father of modern-day taxonomy, wrote Systema Naturae, 1735, and he created a sort of taxonomy of humans. Homo sapiens europaeus, vigorous, muscular, flowing blonde hair, blue eyes, intelligent, innovative, ruled by law. Homo sapiens asiaticus, jet black hair, dark eyes, stern, melancholy, greedy, strict, ruled by opinion. Homo sapiens americanus, ill-tempered, impassive, thick black hair, wide nostrils, harsh face, no beard, paints red lines on his face. Stubborn, free-spirited, ruled by custom. And last but certainly least, Homo sapiens afer, sluggish, lazy, black kinky hair, silky skin, wide nose, thick lips, covered by grease, ruled by caprice. I am the darker brother. I think about a time when I was in high school back in 1992. I was just 16 years old. I remember sitting in a classroom with my classmates in my favorite class, AP US History. I didn't really like history, but I loved my teacher, Mr. Rohn. Mr. Rohn was the tennis coach, but he was also a great storyteller and a great teacher. And I remember this particular day, Mr. Rohn had something special he wanted to share with us. He asked us all a very difficult question. Who was the first to die in the American Revolution? Now, nobody really knew the answers, but all the nerds were trying to pipe in, the usual suspects. Sam Adams, but Paul Revere, Patrick Swayze, Patrick Henry. Well, they were all wrong. Just then, Mr. Rohn snuck me a kind of private wink and said, Crispus Attucks, the Boston Massacre, Monday, March 5th, 1770. So we opened up our books and flipped through to find what this event was. And there I saw, smack dab in the middle of America's first revolutionary moment, a listing of 5 martyrs, 5 great men who gave their lives for the first revolutionary moment. Patrick Carr, Sam Gray, Samuel Maverick, James Caldwell, and Crispus Attucks, a mulatto man. A man who looked more like me than any other historical figure I had ever seen in colonial American history. This dude? This black guy? My chest started to swell with pride. I mean, this was a bonus. It wasn't even Black History Month yet, right? I would later learn that the particular picture we were looking at in that book was actually a drawing done by a man named William Champney in 1855. And he was a part of the abolitionist movement. And he created this picture of the Boston Massacre with Crispus Attucks as a prominent figure in the forefront with exceptionally dark skin and even a bigger figure than everyone else so that people could see the dignity of black people in America. And it was drawn back in 1855. So then I did some research and found out that the original first depiction of the Boston Massacre was by Paul Revere in 1770. Now that particular depiction shows nothing that even looks close to a black person in the scene. And so I got to thinking, blackness has always mattered to us in one way or another. It mattered to William Champney enough to make Crispus Attucks the most prominent figure in his piece of art. It mattered enough to Paul Revere to create a lithograph with a glaring omission of Crispus Attucks' blackness in it. And 200 years later, to a black kid who had never seen his African ancestors presented as anything but slaves in colonial America, Crispus Attucks' blackness mattered to me. Now, before we get caught up in the nostalgia that is America's selective amnesia, let us back up just a few years to the year of our Lord 1723, when Crispus Attucks was born to a black enslaved man in the Framingham area of Massachusetts, and a mother who was of the Wampanoag tribe. Now, we don't know a whole lot about Crispus Attucks, but we do know that he was a runaway slave. Matter of fact, in 1750, there was an article, an ad put out in a Boston newspaper by a man named William Brown, a slave owner. He described Crispus Attucks as a man who was about 6 feet 2 inches tall, knock-kneed, and had curly hair. Incidentally, the name Crispus is Latin for curly. Now, Crispus Attucks, as a young 20-something-year-old runaway slave, found a new life as a sailor. Now, many black people did this in this time. See, the life of a sailor in the early colonial American years was very difficult. It was deadly, dangerous, but it kept them safe from slave catchers. So Crispus Attucks became a sailor and also a rope maker. It is said that on this fateful evening of March 5th, 1770, Crispus Attucks had just returned from a trip to the Bahamas and was on his way to North Carolina. Now, on this particular night, we know that Crispus Attucks was one of the leaders of what appeared to be a mob of American colonials. Now, we don't know a whole lot about all of the details of the night, but there have been several perspectives and several stories shared. One thing that most people agree on is that the American colonists in Boston despised the British soldiers, mainly for two reasons. Number one, because the British soldiers would often work for less than the American colonists and undercut them in the job market. They would steal their jobs. Number two, because the British soldiers would often kidnap young American colonists and inscript them into the Royal Navy legally. So these notions of foreigners coming into our country and taking our jobs and human trafficking, they're not new to us. Well, this particular night, a group of very angry colonists were yelling and throwing everything from snowballs to rocks to clamshells, while 8 British soldiers tried to fend them off. You bloody bucks! Fire, why don't you? You lobsters! Now we know at some point Crispus Attucks, with his club in hand, charged in front of the crowd and yelled, "Knock them down! Kill them! Kill the dogs! They dare not fire!" Now at this, Captain Thomas Preston, the captain of the guard, tried to hold the crowd back. "Stand off! Stand off! I presume no one desires to die this night." Now what happens next is a series of very unfortunate events. Someone throws a rock or a stick and it hits Private Montgomery, who falls to the ground. Someone else shouts, "Damn you, fire!" Crispus Attucks grabs a hold of one of the muskets by the bayonet, and when he does, the soldier fires, landing a hot, molten piece of lead in his chest.
We'll be done with the troubles of this world. The troubles of this world. The troubles of this world. Soon we'll be done with the troubles of this world. I'm going home to live with God.
The soldiers fire indiscriminately into the crowd. Captain Thomas calls, "Cease fire! Cease fire! Cease fire!" When the smoke clears, there are 5 American colonists lying dead or dying in the bloody snow. Crispus Attucks was seen as a hero. In fact, the great poet John Boyle O'Reilly said of him, "He was the first to defy and the first to die." It is said that Crispus Attucks' body lay in state in Faneuil Hall for 3 days, and the great patriot Samuel Adams threw a lavish funeral for him. Thousands of people marched through the streets as Crispus and his fellow martyrs were marched through in their caskets. He was seen as a patriot, not just a riot leader. Then came the trial of the 8 soldiers. They were defended by a well-known and very talented young lawyer who would soon become our second president, Mr. John Adams. Perhaps you've heard of him.
On rise for the Honourable Benjamin Lindy, John Cushing, Peter Oliver, and Edmund Trowbridge, Esquires.
Attucks, with his myrmidons, Jackson's corner, and to the party at the sentry box. Now, the soldiers had pushed the people back, and this man, with his colleagues, shouts, knock them down, they dare not fire, kill them, and tries to knock their brains out. Now, it is no question that the soldiers did not leave the sentry box, but shouted to the people, stand off, stand off. Now, to have reinforcements coming down under the command of a stout mulatto fellow, whose very looks was enough to terrify anyone, what then had not the soldiers to fear? In less than 3 hours, the jury made their decision and acquitted all 8 of the soldiers. And John Adams learned a very important lesson, just like the court back in colonial Virginia with John Punch, that you could weaponize blackness for political and economic gain. Then came the Revolutionary War. And in the midst of the throes of war against Mother Britain, our forefathers drafted the Declaration of Independence on Thursday, July 4th, 1776. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed with certain unalienable rights, that among them are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. With those words, the American ideal was born. And it stood in stark contrast to the daily reality that black captives experienced in that same country. But somehow, this idea of liberty and freedom for all, it infected us all. It is infectious. It is insatiable. It is indomitable. And black captives like Denmark Vesey, one of the founders of Mother Emanuel in Charleston, South Carolina, and as well as Nat Turner, a plantation preacher turned rabble-rouser in Southampton, Virginia. They heard these words and they internalized them. They were fired up by their faith, fueled by a fanatic appetite for freedom, and fascinated by Toussaint Louverture, the black man who led a revolution in Haiti in 1791. By 1804, Haiti was the first and only nation in the Western Hemisphere that was led, run, owned by black captives who had overrun their slaveholders. Now, in the mid-1800s, there were over 250 slave revolts in America. And each one struck fear into the hearts of white Americans. Each revolt, each uprising threatened their way of life. But for black people, each revolt was a potential revolution, hope for a new way of life. And before any revolt could get traction, each one was crushed mercilessly. Its supporters and leaders killed, maimed, banished. In fact, in July 2nd of 1822, Denmark Vesey was convicted of inciting insurrection and executed summarily by the colonial government there in Charleston, South Carolina. Within days, the original Mother Emanuel was burned to the ground. All of this within days of our great nation's anniversary of its Declaration of Independence. Exactly 30 years later, the great activist and abolitionist Frederick Douglass was asked to speak to a proud nation about what he thought of this great day of independence. What to the American slave is your Declaration of Independence? I will answer. It is a reminder. It is of all days in the year, the day that most reveals his gross injustice and cruelty to which he is the constant victim. I say this with a sad sense of the disparity between us. I am not included within the glorious pale of your independence. Your high independence only reveals the immeasurable distance between us. Less than 100 years after the founding of this nation and that great Declaration of Independence, America, the United States, us, devoted to liberty and freedom, found that it could no longer bear the weight of the moral millstone of slavery around its neck. Scottish poet Thomas Campbell put it like this: United States, your banner wears two emblems. One of fame, alas, the other that it bears reminds us of your shame. The white man's liberty in type stands blazoned by your stars. But what's the meaning of your stripes? They mean your Negro scars. The tension between our economic interests and our moral obligations tore a nation apart. And by Friday, April 12th, 1861, the Civil War began. X marks the spot. Over 600,000 American lives were lost on American soil. And among them, there were over 180,000 black soldiers who fought in the Union Army, literally for their freedom. Paul Laurence Dunbar called them those gallant sons of Ham, those gallant colored soldiers who fought for Uncle Sam. Soon, Abraham Lincoln began to realize that he would have to free and be a part of a country that would live up to its own creed and free all of the captives in the country. So on Monday, September 22nd, 1862, he issued the Emancipation Proclamation, declaring that by Thursday, January 1st, 1863, all slaves held by the Confederate States would be thenceforth, and forever free. Which was a nice sentiment, but the emancipation procrastination didn't really do anything, because all of the people who were held slaves were behind Confederate lines, and the war went on for another 2.5 years. It wasn't until Wednesday, December 6, 1865, when the 13th Amendment passed, that slavery officially became illegal in this country. But even then, some of the slave owners on the East Coast got hip to the game, and they smuggled their slaves to the West, to places like Texas, to escape the Freedom Train. It wasn't until June 19th, 1865, when federal soldiers marched into Galveston, Texas, to free the last of the captives, that all Americans were truly born free. We call that day Juneteenth.
Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom over me. And before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free.
But freedom would come at a cost. These newly freed people would soon be marked. When blackness could no longer be marked or be a marker for free labor, it became a marker for incarceration, for criminalization, and victimization. See, while the 13th Amendment outlawed slavery in this country, it insisted that anyone convicted of a crime could still be forced to work for free. So newly freed people now had to confront newly created laws and crimes like vagrancy, loitering, belligerence, indolence. It is amazing that a people who were so consistently and grossly broken down by their country would somehow find some way to stand up and fight for it in every battle and every war.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
So all honor and all glory to those noble sons of Ham, those gallant colored soldiers who fought for Uncle Sam. Then came the great Reconstruction. This was a time when federal soldiers came down to the South to help the Confederate states to rebuild and reconnect to the Union. During this time, some great changes happened in the nation. The 13th Amendment had been passed in 1865. Then came the 14th Amendment in 1868, declaring that anyone born on American soil was an American citizen with right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, not to mention property. Black people became citizens for the first time. Then in 1870, the 15th Amendment passed, giving black men the right to vote for the first time in 250 years. There were actually 15 congressmen elected from the southern states and sent to Washington, D.C. with black skin. from the states of Alabama, Georgia, Florida, Louisiana, North Carolina, Mississippi, Virginia, and Texas. In fact, the first black senator, Hiram Revels, was from Fayetteville, North Carolina. This man was a Union Army chaplain, a preacher, a teacher, a community builder. And although he was born and raised on American soil, his eligibility to be a senator was actually questioned by some of the senators on the floor. You see, in order to become a U.S. senator, you had to be a citizen for 9 years. Well, since the 14th Amendment had not passed until 1868, Hiram Revels had only been a technical constitutional citizen for 2 years. This was the original birther movement, only instead of the place of his birth, it was the time of his birth that was in question. But thank God, after much discussion and argument, the decision was made and Hiram Revels was named a senator. And this was a statement of Charles Sumner, the senator from Boston. The time has come for all argument to end. There's nothing more that needs to be said. For a long time now, it has been clear that colored persons must be senators. All men are created equal, says the Great Declaration. And today, a great act gives this verity. Today, we make the Declaration a reality. Now, while the Constitution could be amended, the attitudes that Americans had about blackness ran deep in the blood and soil of this great nation. And before long, the tension between black and white, Republican and Democrat, Northern and Southern, put so much pressure on the Reconstruction that it could not bear it. And it all came down to one stark moment in 1876 during the presidential election. And the election was between the Republican Rutherford B. Hayes and the Democrat Samuel Tilden. Now, the election was tight. It was so close that there were just a few questionable electoral votes in 3 states that would decide it. They were Louisiana, South Carolina, and, you guessed it, Florida. Now, no one could figure out how to resolve this dispute until some very smart and powerful Republicans went down south and had a conversation with the Dixiecrats. They made a trade. If the Democrats would allow their president to take the seat, in other words, if they would vote for Rutherford B. Hayes, then the federal government would pull all federal troops out of the South. Mind you, these troops were the only thing standing between a fledgling black citizenry and all of the reactionary rage of suppressed white supremacy. The deal was made. X marks the spot. Rutherford B. Hayes became president. The Republicans won the presidency, and the South rose again with a vengeance. What happened was the Democrats began to institute laws and protocols that would segregate whites from blacks in every social setting, from the church house to the outhouse. They crushed any political power that black people had from the 15th Amendment with things like poll taxes and literacy tests and outright theft. At this point, by 1877, the Great Reconstruction had ended. And Jim Crow, America's new apartheid system, was born. The congressmen and senators were allowed to finish their terms and abruptly sent home. The last of the representatives, George Henry Wright, left office in 1901. It would be 28 years before Americans would elect another black congressman. Senator Blanche K. Bruce, a former slave who had risen up and become a great man, the last of the black senators of his time, left office in 1880. It would be another 8 decades before the Senate floor would see a black face in 1967. The images of the frightful black presence, the muscle-bound, mutineering mulatto, these images of darkness and of fear were etched and inked and carved into the mind of the American psyche. The black beast, the rapacious, rabble-rousing Negro, the degenerate descendants of Ham, descending upon a country of wholesome white people. See, if the American dream was pure and white and true, it was only the American thing to do to keep the sooty hands of the black man off of it, for fear of what they might do to us. Soon, white supremacists and white nationalist groups like the Ku Klux Klan, the White Knights, and the Red Shirts began to pass through the South like wildfire. From Southern soil sprouted Confederate monuments by the hundreds as a way to honor and to mark the struggle of the white man against Northern aggression and black contamination. The country again came to a boiling point, and the tension rose throughout the South and even in the North. And in the South particularly, a powder keg was about to blow, and it took one spark when in 1897, on a Wednesday, August 11th, an elderly woman named Rebecca Latimer Felton, an activist and philanthropist and speaker, very conservative woman, had done her research, and she found out that the greatest threat to white women in the rural South was the roving black rapist. If it takes lynching to protect a woman's dearest possession from the ravening human beasts, then I say lynch 1,000 times a week if necessary. Now, a week after this, on August 18th, a black man named Alexander Manley, the editor of Wilmington, North Carolina's black newspaper, the Wilmington Record, published a very public, direct retort to Mrs. Felton's statement. And it was downright courageous. Mrs. Felton, like many so-called Christians, loses sight of the basic principle of the religion of Christ in her plea for one class of people as against another. We have learned in our experience with poor white people in this country that the women of that race are no more particular in the matter of clandestine meetings with colored men than are white men with colored women. And what happens is that over time, the woman's infatuation or the man's boldness calls attention to them, and the man is lynched for rape. Mrs. Felton must begin at the fountainhead if she wishes to purify the stream. Brother say, what? That was like standing in the middle of Times Square with the loaded revolver playing Russian roulette. This was a black man directly addressing a white woman about sex between black men and white women in the South. Now, Alexander Manley wasn't the only Manley living on the edge during this time. Let's return to the Birmingham area, or the Bingham area in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, where Manley McCauley is living. He's a young man working as a farmhand on the Brewer farm. He was born in the beginning of the spring in 1880. He was born to David and Lovina McCauley. He had 3 sisters. And we know that Manley was born free and seems so far and distant from slavery that I imagine that the tales that his elders would tell him about slavery were probably as distant and ephemeral as a ghost story. Then there was Milton Brewer. Milton Brewer was born shortly after the Civil War ended, and he was a prominent farmer in the Bingham Township in the Chapel Hill area, as well as a leader of the Republican Party. He was married to Maggie Lloyd Brewer. Both Maggie and Milton were progressives and believed in equality of the races. They had 3 children, ages 10, 6, and 3, and it is said that their marriage is on the rocks. Now, let us go to Chapel Hill, 1898. It's fall. A slight smell of smoke in the air. It's time to harvest the corn, and many farmers are going from farm to support each other and help to pull in the harvests as they talk about politics and religion and life between nips of corn liquor and plates of barbecue. We call it a corn shucking. Another corn shucking, Milton? Yes, dear, another corn shucking. We are corn farmers. Maggie, why must you be so difficult? Difficult, Milton? Difficult is living in this house, taking care of these children with nowhere to go and nothing to do. Maggie, if you cannot appreciate the lifestyle that I have afforded for you and these children, go, Milton, just go to your damnable corn shucking. I'm going to my father's house. I shall not spend another night under your roof. Maggie! Maggie, you get back here. Maggie! Manley, get in here. Manley! Yes, sir. Yes, sir, Mr. Brewer. Manley, were you eavesdropping on my conversation? No, sir, Mr. Brewer. I was just packing up the horses for the corn shucking. Yeah, well, eavesdropping or packing up for the corn shucking, either one. You've undoubtedly heard that Mrs. Brewer has had another one of her tantrums for which I have no remaining patience. Okay, Manley, we're going to have to divide and conquer. Let's see, I'll go to the corn shucking here. You go to the corn shucking in Pittsburgh. Get a couple of men together and please take Mrs. Brewer and the children to the Lloyd farm. We'll talk soon. Yes, sir. Manley, before you go, I'm not an idiot, Manley. I know that Mrs. Brewer has taken advantage of your obedience to speak ill of me and our marriage in her spare time. And while normally such feminine hysteria does not bother me, we do not have time to dilly-dally. You will quickly, expeditiously drop those children and that woman at the Lloyd farm and go to the corn shucking in Pittsburgh. Is that understood? Understood, sir. Understood. Now, at the Lloyd home, Thaddeus Lloyd, the father of Maggie, has said that he noticed Manley and Maggie in close conversation at the front door. Woman, are you crazy? What are you talking about? Do you love me or not, Manley? Maggie, you know I love you, but all this talk about us running away, I don't see how nothing good can come of it. How can anything good come from us staying here, Manley? Can't you feel it? It's change. It's time for change. Can't you feel it in the air? Is it Milton? I can't argue against Mr. Brewer. He's been a good boss to me. I don't love him, Manley. I love you. Manley, take me away from here. We could go to Philadelphia or New York, even Canada. I hear things are nice up there. Maggie, what you going to do with the children? I'll leave them here with my father just for a few months until we figure things out. Maggie! Maggie, your children are inside. They need you. They need their mama. Manley, don't you have a corn shucking to go to? Yes, sir. Yes, sir, Mr. Lloyd. Mr. Brewer just asked me to ensure that Mrs. Brewer and the children was taken care of before I went. Nothing they need, I can't provide, Manley. Go on now. Yes, sir, Mr. Brewer. I'll make arrangements. Be back for you at dusk. Now, what happens next? Only Manley and Maggie know. But the newspapers report. On Wednesday afternoon, Mr. Brewer returned from a corn shucking to learn the horrible news. He immediately organized a posse, and the elopers were captured just beyond Jonesboro. Manley! Manley! Get out here, Manley! Right now! You get out here right now, Manley! Milton! What are you doing here? Woman, I will handle you later. At this moment, I am here as an employer of one Manley McCauley, and I want to see my employee right now. Manley! They said you never made it to the corn shucking in Pittsburgh, Manley, huh? Where you been, Manley? Mr. Brewer. Shut your filthy mouth, nigger. Oh, you're in for a world of hurt. Let us at him, Brewer. Walter, Raildew. King, shut your mouth. Manley, I just needed to look you in the eye one last time. Manley, I trusted you. I trusted you with my farm and with my family. And you betrayed that trust. Now, I paid you well, and I respected you. I treated you like a man, didn't I, Manley? A man is a man. We talked about that. I don't care what color your skin is. Your man is a man. But you, Manley, do you have any idea what you have done here? Somebody get Maggie. Walter, Jesse, Raildew. Let's do this quickly. The Negroes in this section have demanded information about the whereabouts of one Manley McCauley and have threatened trouble if the information is not forthcoming. A mob of masked men took the prisoner to a nearby dogwood, bent it down, and tied to its bough a rope around McCauley's neck, turned it loose, jerking him into midair, breaking his neck instantly. The newspapers saw only one villain in all of this. A beautiful young woman elopes with a rough, thick-lipped, repulsive, impudent Negro. A black, repulsive, grossly impertinent, reproachful Negro and an imp of the devil. The body was found on Sunday by a man named Tom Mike. I was walking through the woods there, through a path, and there I seen it. just swinging from the limb of a tree. The toes were just touching the ground. Whoever done it knew what they was doing. That knot held them up there 10 days, I reckon. The local newspapers and Democrats used this scandal to embarrass the Republicans and as propaganda for the election. Milton Brewer reaped what he sowed. Vote for the protection of your wives and daughters. Vote for the love of your race. And they were successful. Their propaganda blew wind into the sails of the Dixiecrats, and across North Carolina they won most local, state, and federal elections. But in Wilmington, North Carolina, there was still a group of wealthy, well-educated, and powerful black people and Republicans who held positions at the city government level. On Thursday, November 10th, 1898, a man named Alfred Moore Waddell, a Confederate veteran and a statesman, led a mob through the city of Wilmington. And standing on the steps of the city capitol, he made a public statement. We will not live under these intolerable conditions. No society can stand it. We intend to change it. If we have to choke the current of the Cape Fear with Negro carcasses. Waddell led a mob that burned down Alex Manley's newspaper and took over the city council building. They ran out all of the aldermen and placed Democrats in every political position in the city. Waddell was named the mayor. This was the first and only successful coup on American soil ever. All the while, about 150 miles away, Manley McCauley's body hung from the limb of a dogwood tree. A few months later, James Weldon Johnson, the great American poet and songwriter, drafted a poem of love and light in a time of great darkness and despair. He dedicated it to Abraham Lincoln. He called it Lift Every Voice. About 20 years later, it would be named by the NAACP as the Negro National Anthem. It goes like this. Listen. Shh.
Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring. Ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea.
It wasn't that black folks wanted their own national anthem. When you live in a country where folks around you seem hell-bent on breaking you down, you got to find some way to pick yourself up, to encourage yourself, to remind yourself that your life matters. In early January of 1900, the great journalist and activist Ida B. Wells spoke to a conflicted nation and addressed their conflict of conscience around black lives and how much they really mattered. Our country's national crime is lynching. Our watchword has been the land of the free and the home of the brave. Brave men do not gather by the thousands. to torture and murder a single individual so bound and gagged that he cannot give even feeble resistance or defense. Nor do brave men or women stand by and watch such things done without compunction of conscience, nor read about them without protest. Surely it is the nation's duty to correct its own evils. On Thursday, November 14th, 1898, Jesse King, Walter Neville, Reldu Lloyd, and Milton Brewer were charged with the murder of Manley McCauley. It was a 2 p.m. trial and a very speedy decision. They were all acquitted, not guilty. Maggie was returned to her home. She and Milton went on to have 2 more children. They had 15 grandchildren. They're buried today in a graveyard in Chapel Hill. Maggie died in 1957 at the ripe old age of 86, and Milton died 3 years later at the age of 94. He died just 11 days after 4 bold and courageous university students sat down at a Woolworth's counter in Greensboro, just 50 miles away, to demand their right to sit at the table with their white brothers and sisters. They send me to eat in the kitchen when company comes, but I laugh and eat well and grow strong. Tomorrow, I'll be at the table when company comes, and nobody will dare say to me, eat in the kitchen then. Nowadays, if any of us sees a noose or anything that looks like a noose hanging from a tree or a garage door, we instantly call racism or hate crime. Our stomachs churn with righteous indignation. And there's safety in indignation, isn't there? There's certainty in indignation. But blackness is a slippery spirit. It's sticky. It conforms to the contours of our conscience. It is transformed into a marker for violence, criminality, poverty, unemployment, disease, and death. Frantic 911 calls and stand your ground laws. I believe it was Clementa C. Pinckney who once said, in the South, we have a deep appreciation for history. We don't always have a deep appreciation for each other's history. See, histories unreconciled can become projectiles, refusing to mesh and tearing through flesh. On Sunday, February 23rd, 2020, a 25-year-old black man named Ahmaud Arberry is jogging through a neighborhood not far from his own home. It's a neighborhood called Scintilla Shores in Brunswick, Georgia. He makes an unauthorized foray into a construction site, pops back out, continues to run on his route. Now, Ahmad, incidentally, means praiseworthy in Arabic. Soon, 2 men who live in that neighborhood notice Ahmad. Gregory McMichael, age 64, and his son, Travis McMichael, age 34. Now, Gregory means watchful or alert in the Greek, Gregorius. Travis is Old English for crossroads or toll gate. On this particular Sunday afternoon, on that road in that neighborhood, Gregory's watchful eye captures Ahmaud's black body, blackness out of place. And soon Ahmaud will be required to stop at Travis's toll gate and pay a heavy, heavy toll. In that moment, everything that is praiseworthy about Ahmaud is shrouded by his blackness. Gregory jumps into his truck. He has a .357 Magnum. Travis has a shotgun. Gregory calls 911.
911, what's the address of emergency?
I'm out here at Satilla Shores. There's a black male running down the street.
Satilla, where at Satilla Shores?
I don't know what street we're on. Stop right there! Is it? Stop! Travis!
Ahmaud runs. He runs hard and fast, like John Punch running for his freedom back in 1640. But then he realizes that Gregory and Travis aren't going to let him go. They corner him. He's going to have to face this tyranny like Crispus Attucks did back on March 5th, 1770. Perhaps with the same sickening mixture of fear and defiance that Manley McCauley felt as that noose was passed over his neck. But this is not colonial Virginia in 1640. It's not Boston, Massachusetts in 1770. It's not even Chapel Hill in 1898. It's Brunswick, Georgia in 2020. Ahmaud realizes he's going to have to fight. He grabs a hold of the shotgun and his fists fly. He's shot once in the arm and twice in the chest.
Soon we'll be done with the troubles of this world. The troubles of this world. The troubles of this world. Soon we'll be done with the troubles of this world. I'm going home to live with God.
Ahmaud's body lay there dead in the street as police officers and neighbors take pictures and videos. Gregory and Travis return home and sleep in their beds on that Sunday evening. They're not arrested until over 2 months later on May 7th, after videos of Ahmaud's murder are published through all of the media, news channels, and social media platforms. We got to see Ahmaud dying across the world. His body suspended in time, wrapped in replay, like Manley McCauley's body suspended from the limb of that dogwood tree, his neck wrapped in rope. Soon these images of Ahmaud's public death collapsed, collided, and coalesced with images of the now infamous curbside execution of George Floyd under the knee of Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin. These two names, Ahmaud Arberry and George Floyd, have now become famous. Their lives and names and faces are celebrated by their communities, by their families, and by some who would chant their names at Black Lives Matter rallies. And they are defamed by some who prefer to focus on their pedigrees and their complicated personal histories and criminal records. Then there are those who would prefer to pretend like people like Ahmaud Arberry and George Floyd never existed. See, in America, we have a very fluid definition of tyranny. For some of us, tyranny is a completely different concept than it is for others. We have to learn that whether it's Massachusetts or Minneapolis, Boston or Brunswick, Chapel Hill or Charleston, as Americans, we all understand that foreign occupation of our soil is tyranny, a threat to our national existence. But as Americans, only some of us seem to understand that racism in America, on our soil, is a threat to our spiritual and bodily existence. You know what my 12-year-old son asked me when we watched the murders of Ahmaud Arbery and George Floyd? What did he do, Daddy? I don't know, son. But whatever he did, we're going to make sure we don't ever do that, right? Right. Right. Right? 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 Besides, they'll see how beautiful I am and be ashamed. I too am America.
God of our weary years, God of our silent tears, thou who hast brought us thus far on the way, thou who hast by thy might led us into the light, keep us forever in the path, we pray, lest our feet stray from the places, our God, where we met thee, lest our hearts, drunk with the wine of the world, we forget thee, shadowed beneath thy hand, may we forever stand, true to our God, true to our name.